This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Carlo Bobilas, and I'll be your moderator. Today's session will be presented by technical marketing engineer Eric Rennie. But before I hand over the mic, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's session. Today's session will be recorded and made available on demand. We'll also have a live session, and we'll provide some details at the end on where to get the recording itself. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you are on WebEx and have a question for our speaker, please feel free to send it through the question and answer panel, where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. For those tuning into our live stream, thank you very much for joining in as well. Q&A is limited to those via WebEx. However, we will have a post-event Q&A thread on the Cisco Learning Network where you can post any follow-up questions you may have. So without any further ado, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Eric. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Carlo. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. In this quick hour or this webinar, we're going to cover obviously what's new in Secure Network Analytics release 750, which came out recently. So it's a GA version. So I'm going to quickly run through the major features and functions that you will be seeing in this kind of release. So let me get started. So what we've got, what I should say is the main release. There's lots of other things that we've done underneath the hood, but the major things we've done in this release, or you will have visibility of, is we're expanding our detections using the data store deployment. So what that means is we're now able to have network detections based on firewall log collection. And I've got a slide coming up and showing a bit more detail what I mean by that. But we're also able, with those firewall log ingestion, we're also able to create what we call custom security events based on that firewall syslog information. So that's kind of cool. You'll see that. So we've expanded those detections. On the response side, with the Converge Analytics, or you might hear us call it Central Analytics, it's the same feature. We're in the process of changing names. But with Converge Analytics, aka Central Analytics, we have the ability now to respond to what we call alerts. Alerts comes from the Converge Analytics engine, which sits within the manager or the SMC. And we're able to generate alerts on that. Previously, we couldn't do that. We could only visualize those alerts within the dashboard, but now we can actually respond to those. We also have the capability to post those alerts into XDR, which is obviously a key capability that we need. On the user experience, there's been a lot of back-end improvements that we've been doing on the engineering side. We've changed how the initial setup of SNA is done, how basically we got rid of something called application setup. So if you install the virtual appliances for SNA, Secure Network Analytics, then you'll know there's usually a application setup, then there's initial setup, and there's a few other things you need to do. Now in this version, you'll notice if you install the VM from scratch or from the beginning, that there's no AST menu, which is kind of cool. They've sped that up and moved some of that functionality into the initial setup, or first time setup, I should say. We'll see the Converge Analytics user interface. We've updated how that looks. You'll see that. We've also removed the old SCA or Stealthwatch Cloud Analytics dashboard. You'll know in previous versions that if you go in the main dashboard drop-down, there was an option there to tie your SCA portal to your on-premise SNA. That is now gone for obvious reasons that SCA doesn't really exist anymore. That's part of XDR or XDR Analytics, and that's how you would access it there. We've also done some smart licensing updates on how you do the registration of those licensing. On the enhancement side, we've done a lot of work in this version for government certifications, which are underway. So if you're in the federal sector here in the US, then DoD, FIPS, Common Criteria, USG6, all that work is underway at the moment to get all that certified for this release for 750. We've also done, as part of that compliance work, we're now supporting TLS version 1.0 and 1.3, you'll see in the slide coming up. We also restricting root access, which is a double-edged sword, I'll be honest with you, but that's kind of key aspect to tightening security on the appliances. And I'll go into a bit more detail what I mean by that root access restrictions. We've also updated our Mongo database upgrade underneath. Again, you won't visually see this as a user, but it's all key aspects to compliance and certification work that we need to do. We've also improved our IB version 6 support, which I'll go into again in a bit more detail on another slide. And another great feature is we've simplified certificate management. So what I mean by that is when your certificate, appliance certificates start to expire, and by default, if you bought SNA about 5 years ago, your certificate's probably about to due to expire. In previous versions, I'll be honest, it wasn't so easy to refresh those certificates. Now we made it such a simple kind of point and click way to refresh the certificates so the clients can still speak to each other without interrupting any operations or services. Also in this version, we support M5, sorry, I should say M4 still, M5s and M6 appliances, and the new hypervisors ESX8, as you'll see, and newer ones for KVM. And I'll cover in the last bit of here, it's obviously our push and our drive in each version of SA we're doing is obviously becoming component of XDR, showing the integration of how we can add value and valuable, should we say, alarms and alerts into the XDR detection pipeline. And the last thing we'll mention is breach suites. If you haven't heard about suites, the way that we at Cisco are selling our solutions now is part of suites. And you'll see SNA Security Analytics is part of that breach suite, which is helping our customers to obviously detect breaches. So let's have a quick recap. So what have we been doing over the last few years? Now, most of you probably have seen previous webinars, but one of the things we have been doing is improving our architecture. We've changed the architecture. Traditionally, we would have a manager or SMC, Stopwatch Management Console, you might know the old name. We'd have a flow collector and away you go. You're happy, you can run. What we now introduce by modernizing architecture is the data store component. Excuse me. So we have the manager, data store, and a flow collector. Now, adding that data store has actually improved a lots of things in our design. It's improved our data integrity. We can scale larger. We can retain that data for longer. We can make it more cost effective. How we deploy that data node, we can have a single node or we can have multiple nodes. By having the data node, that means we can make the flow collector, as we'll see coming up in a slide, ingest multi-telemetry. So what I mean by that is we not only just consuming flow data, so net flow, JFlow, SFlow, whatever kind of flow, we can also consume syslogs from the FTD, ACA, Cisco firewalls. We can also take MVM or network visibility module flow from endpoints, all on the one flow collector. That's because we've got that data store in our architecture that can actually store that information for us. Also, with the data store design, we mentioned the converged analytics or central analytics. That's an additional detection engine now that we can run. Currently, it's running from the manager that we can run on the manager that will interrogate that data store. And it gives us about 48 additional network alerts. And what I like about those alerts, 96%, or I think it's 90%, 97% of that now, are mapped to the MITRE framework. So we get more detail than we're traditionally used to with just a traditional SNA deployment. So there's a lot of advantages of modernizing that architecture, adding that data store, and going forward with that kind of design. This is what it kind of looks like. So I'll take it piece by piece. On the left, we've got the NetFlow devices. That's how traditional we collect NetFlow from the routers, the switches, firewalls, whatever you want. We consume that. The flow collector sits there. It runs its behavioral security algorithms on that and generates what we call security events, which then form alarms within the manager. You can also create what we call custom security events, which is rules that you can generate and say, if I see this host talking to this host, then generate an alarm, as a simple example. So all that resides on our flow collector engine. What we've added, obviously in 750 with that one flow collector, because we have a data store cluster, as you see on the right, we can also consume NVM or network visibility module flow from the endpoints. So where you have secure client, or you might know the older name, AnyConnect VPN client, it has a module called NVM that you can enable. That effectively gets what we call, I don't want to call it NetFlow, it's more detailed than NetFlow. It's officially NVIS flow from that endpoint. And I'll show you a slide in a minute of actually what the fields are that we get from that endpoint. It's a lot of information that we get. So we can consume that information. The flow collector can actually run analytics on the NVM flow and obviously generate alerts based on that. Obviously, you can see the green, blue lines. All that obviously going to be stored in that data store cluster that we see there. Another interesting thing in this release is working with our Cisco Secure Firewall. So that's your FTD appliances, SA appliances, for example. We're consuming the IDS events, the malware events, the leaner events, the connection logs, for example. They all get stored on the data store. But the interesting thing here is now in this version, with the connection logs that we see from the firewalls, we effectively convert that into NetFlow, and we then run it through the flow collector engine for analysis there and that behavioral security events green section you see. So that's kind of cool. Um, the other thing I should mention with that secure client for the remote users, you'll see there's a black line there. If the remote user is not connected to the VPN and sending us that MVM flow, that endpoint collector is going to buffer that flow for a period of time. So when that comes back online, that user or reconnects to VPN, we will get a copy of that flow. We call that off network, basically MVM flow, because they've been off the network for a while. We don't actually process that through the flow collector engine because it's not live data as such. It's historical, but we don't throw it away. We store it on our data store there so we can give you visibility of that off network traffic, as we call it, and we can still give you the historical records to check it. You'll notice where I've got the manager on the right hand side there. That's where your Converge Analytics engine sits, and it's querying the data store for that 48 additional alerts, or should we say what you call a criteria that it's looking for. It's able then to do that. What I like about it is that it is minimum kind of tuning, minimum feeding I need to do. It automatically detects what the role is of an endpoint, what it's doing, and then will adjust the alarm sensitivity based on that. And it will generate those alerts for us in addition to what we're getting from that flow collector engine, from those behavioral security events. And obviously, we can promote those events into our XDR, our extended detection response from our Cisco in the cloud, if we want to. So it's a way to collect all information from the networks, from the firewalls, from your endpoints. We can process that. We get the alarms, the alerts, and we can forward certain alerts or alarms into XDR for it then to go into its detection pipeline. So let's go into one of the bit more detail of one of the new features that we can talk about here in 750, and that is the detections for firewall logs. So we've mentioned this on the previous slide. What we're doing here, we have the flow collector. Flow collector has that behavioral security engine on it. It has the custom security events, which you write yourself, and the data store. So what we're doing here now, because we've got the data store involved, remember we need the data store for this, we convert those firewalls effectively into NetFlow. We're basically taking the syslog from the firewall and we're looking at what we call the 5 tuple, the 5 bits of important information that we need for the NetFlow engine or the flow collector to work with. We're taking this information and then processing that. As you see on the right hand side, this is part of something called security analytics and logging, or SAL. So you're not consuming additional FPS or flows per second license as such, but you still need a SAL license, which is based on gigabytes per day. So be careful of that. Also, a tip here is that the firewall should only be configured to send firewall logs and not firewall logs and NetFlow. So what I mean by that is traditionally what we have is that people would normally configure their firewalls, whether they're Cisco or not Cisco, to send NetFlow or IPFix, I should say, to the flow collector. What we're saying is, yes, you can do that now. You can configure the firewalls to send IPFix, and you can send the syslog to the flow collector. But effectively, you'll be double counting. So the flow collector will see the same kind of connection events potentially from the net flow it receives and from the syslog that it converts. So just a cautionary tale there on the right. If you're going to use this feature, if you're going to send the syslog connection events to the flow collector in 750 with the data store, then disable or do not enable sending net flow also to the same flow collector. Not only is it effectively going to double count, like here, it's going to create misleading byte counts. We don't want that as well. Okay, and we're only looking at the connection logs. So what I mean by that, that's the only thing we're running through that detection engine at the moment. We're looking at improving that in future releases and increasing the number of fields that we can look at from that secure firewall endpoint. So at the moment, the detections is just using what we call the connection end events. If you have a look in the SAL or security analytics and logging or on FMC, you'll see there's connection start events, connection end events, there's intrusion events, there's IDS events, malware events, things like that. We're just looking at connection end events and we're using those events to process and turn into effectively NetFlow and process through the flow collector engine. So just a few things to be aware of there. And here, like as it's building out in the slide, we're ingesting the flow, or so port 8514. So that's your typical syslog port. We're converting those logs, like I said, just the 5 tuple, just the header bit of information that we need into NetFlow, and then we're applying those behavioral analytics. Now, the advantage of that is that we can now obviously run detections based on the syslog information from the firewalls, which is often there,
This
releasing
meeting
access
is being
control,
recorded.
it's saying blocked. In the bottom screen, we can do a flow search based on that. So it's giving us visibility of all that information that we didn't have before. Before we would just save the firewall logs from SAL, and the security application logging was basically a repository kind of service where people could see with the SAL app some events and things like that, and we would retain the logs, but we didn't do any active actions on that. Now we are. We can take the IP address from a SAL, from the SAL app itself, so there's something of interest. We can say, go and show me the flow for this. Show me what you see, the conversation from this firewall log information that we've ingested and converted. Also, what we didn't see before was if you were looking at a host. So here I'm showing a host summary report. You see an IP address 192.168.178.105, for example. That IP address is actually coming from the SAL app on the manager. That information is from the syslog that we got from our firewall. Now, when I do a host report on that, I can actually see below that there's security events generated on that. And I can see there's flow denied actions. So we're seeing some flow denied by the firewall for this particular IP address, or being blocked, as they would say, probably on the FMC. I can get some more detail on that, and I can do some action on that if I wanted to. Now, because I'm seeing effectively flow information and security events, I can actually now create custom security events on that if I wanted to. In the SAL app itself, this is what the SAL app looks like, or security analytics and logging on-prem, as my bigger official name is. This is what you would normally see in the app, and this is what we've had for a long while. There's no change to this. We still see the events here. You can see connection end events listed in the main panel here. We can see the intrusion events, malware events, whatever we need to do from here. We can filter on that in this particular view. The difference here is now that I can click on a source IP address in the column, effectively do a pivot into that host report, which then shows me any security events for that connection end event if we have anything recorded on that. And then I could create a custom security event to trigger off that, which is what I'm going to show in the next slide. Okay. So now we've got that information in, I can actually start to create my own custom security events or firewall rules based on that. And here I'm just showing a very, very simple example where I've looked at the what we call inside host group and outside host group here. So I'm saying anything inside my organization that I'm tracking that talks to the outside, anything I don't own, the internet, for example. If I see a flow action and it says denied, for example, then generate a custom security event. So I'll see a policy violation on the main dashboard if I configure that. Obviously, there's other rules, more complicated rules. If you want to do that, you could actually configure on it. But the purpose here is what I'm trying to show is that now that we're getting that information from the firewall, from the syslog, that we converted to NetFlow, I can actually run my own customized rules on that and run detections if I want to do that, or alerts. So that's something we didn't have before 750. Obviously, when you set up a CSE, it's going to show up on that main dashboard, like I said, as a policy violation. And it quickly highlights that somebody maybe, should we say, misconfigured the firewall. Maybe somebody's, blocking traffic they shouldn't do, or should be blocking traffic they should be doing. So it's another advantage of being able to create your own rules that's not part of the firewall itself, just to verify that the firewall is functioning as you expect it to be. Now, I did say one of the major kind of features that we had in this release was the ability for response management and additional actions. Now, response management, if you've never used it in Cisco Analytics, is the part that we basically use to generate emails, syslog messages, webhooks, any kind of, should we say, not integration, but any way we can get information out. So once SNA detects an alert on it, we want to be able to respond to that alert. So this is why we use response management. You might have used response management maybe for ICE use cases, for example, where you use ISO quarantine a host or things like that. We still have that. That's still in response management. But what we're focusing here on this slide is that the converged analytics or the central analytics engine, remember, with the data, so that's the one that sits on the manager. This is new. We're given the ability now that if you see a converged analytics alert, which is different from the traditional alarm, we can now use the response management module to send, for example, an email. We can send a syslog. We can send it or post it, as we call it, up into threat response, which is part of XDR. Or we can use webhooks to forward that alert. So this is another confusing thing that if you haven't seen this yet, that within Cisco Analytics, you'll see alarms listed and alerts. They are different. Alerts come from the converged analytics engine. Alarms come from the traditional, what we saw, the flow collector behavioral engine that's detected now. So I make that distinction because they're going to be two different types of alarms and alerts being sent. And a good example of what I mean is when you actually look at 750 now, and when you look at the response manager here, you'll see there's a new option listed, and maybe you can see my mouse moving here. I can see the host alarm, host groups, and now you've got this new alert section. The alert section is for that converged analytics or that central analytics there. When you select that rule, you're then given actions. What actions can you do? And you'll notice here now, we've got syslog message brackets alarm, syslog message brackets alert. So remember again, alert is for the converged analytics. That's the additional engine, that 48 alerts that we're going to send. So when you select one of these, be careful which one you select, or not be careful, make sure you know which one you're selecting to see the expected response. So in 750, we currently support obviously sending alerts via syslog. So you can send out to, say, your SIM, for example, like Splunk. I've done that in our lab. That's kind of easy. We just use a default syslog profile, and it will send any alert that I define within Converged Analytics to my syslog server, for example. I could generate obviously an email. I could use the webhook, and I could use threat response. I can use that as a action, or as I'll show you in Central Analytics, you can actually use what we call promote button, which will promote it, you manually promoting it in to threat response, which is in the back end of our XDR solution at the moment in the cloud. Notice at the moment in this version, we're not doing anything with ICE policies or S&P traps. So those are the moment. So for example, I can't send ICE ANC policy change requests. For example, I want to quarantine somebody based on any of the converged analytics alerts that we see. So for example, converged analytics, if I see an alert say unusual remote or geographically unusual remote connection, for example, something like that. And that's because somebody's trying to come in from a region that we don't expect. We've alerted on that. I can't, for example, then say, hey, ICE, go and quarantine whoever this unusual remote connection is trying to talk to internally on my network. So obviously ICE is the policy engine. I can't do that at the moment with the alerts. I can do that at the moment with the alarms though. So if I have the traditional flow collector behavioral alarms, then I can actually say, yes, if I see, for example, this internal host misbehaving or talking to somewhere it shouldn't be doing, then I can then say, yes, go to ICE, apply the quarantine policy, for example, which will then quarantine that endpoint. So just laboring the point there is a difference, and be careful of the difference there, whether it says alarm or alert and which features are supported. Okay. Here, just showing you with the alerts, you do have a few more ways to define the rules. So this is looking at defining a rule here. We can see, it's just a simple example. You can look at the priority. You can add the alert type. Notice the alert type here is suspected cryptocurrency activity. That's not your typical what you call alarm you see from the flow collector engine or algorithms it's running. You can put processing time, IP addresses. So again, you can create the rules as you wish. So this is on the response management side of things and what we're creating here. This is not custom security event rules. This is the response management rule. So this is you telling it how you want to respond to that converged analytics condition or alarm or alert type. And then associated actions, like I said, sending email, syslog, webhook, for example. So other things, we do have the what we call data enrichment from SNA into XDR. This is key. That's been in the product for a while, but you'll notice here that we can limit the number of security events that we want to send into XDR, which is kind of key, and the time period that we want to do that. So there is configuration limits that we can change when we do that integration. Now notice on the screen here, it does say SecureX. That will be changing to say XDR in the next release. Obviously, 750, when we released it, obviously SecureX was still there. As you will know, that SecureX is officially going away. So that will change in the GUI in the next coming releases. Key point though is that we can forward events or security events at the moment into the XDR pipeline. And here's just showing you a screenshot in the background of where we can see the sources, analytics, i.e. SNA. And you can see the typical security events that are being forwarded here. For example, suspect data loss, high total traffic, suspect quite long flow. So these are the what we call security events that a flow collector engine is generating for us that we can actually send up into XDR for data enrichment for basically threat hunting and investigations. This will be changing in future releases, so watch this space. We'll be doing it slightly different coming up, but in 750, this is what we're doing today. And if you've seen an XDR and you joined your resonator or forwarding events up, this is what you would see. Obviously, in the event details panel on the right, you get a short description, a long description. You get obviously the indicators there, port scan that we're getting. Again, the events detail panel will be changing within XDR. In future releases, we'll have slightly different ways of how that information is generated, but that's not a topic for discussion for today. Lots of things going on. Again, I'll just build out the slide. Within Cisco Analyst 750, if you're looking, for example, at the IP address 102.168.163.144 on the left, if you click on those three little dots you just about see, you get this additional pivot menu or dynamic pivot menu comes up where you can view flows for the IP address. You can do the top reports, do external lookups. You can also look at SecureX. Again, like I said, that SecureX, that name will change in the next version to be obviously XDR, but the functionality is still there. The purpose here is the pivot menu is there, and you're able to then pivot off into XDR kind of actions you see on the far right, where we have things like XDR automation, where you can automatically enact those playbooks. For example, move computer to a triage group. You can do that, or block, use Duo to block, or secure file instant monitoring. Whatever the XDR automation rules you've created within XDR, you can activate on that. So just showing here that the response capabilities, we're expanding them, and we're going to get better in the next version of how we integrate or play along with XDR in this whole scenario. Now, the less, I hate to say boring, but the less kind of exciting things, but important things that we've done in this release are coming up. So one of the things you'll notice, I mentioned on the initial slide, we no longer have this appliance setup tool screen, hence the big red X. The workflow is changed. So we no longer need the appliance setup tool and then what we call the first time setup or FTS. Now, if you're installing a VM, download the VM from software.cisco.com, for example, and you power up the first time, you no longer see this screen. You'll go straight to the first time setup screen. And it's basically improving your experiences and the setup efficiency. So instead of, because every time you do this, let's put it this way, if you use the AST tool, you have to fill in basic IP configuration information, NTP information, DNS, and things like that. Then the box would reboot, the virtual appliance will reboot. Then you have to go into the first time setup and kind of repeat some of those steps, which is kind of not efficient. So we kind of improved that or streamlined that just to speed that up. Obviously, this is only important if you install this and you only go through this once and probably in the lifetime of the solution. But it's important for some users out there that we can do that. Another important thing is that we can run the first time setup tool now as a user we call sysadmin user. Now, the reason for that is going to be obvious coming up on the next slides. In previous versions, you could log into the CLI on Cisco Analytics using root access. And root access gives you, guess what? Access to everything. Because the compliance work and the government certifications, we've had to basically switch off root access or by default. So we've moved a lot of what we call the workflows, so the actions you need to do that would typically be done by root access level into this admin account called sysadmin. That means you don't need to get a consent token. Now, the consent token is a way that you can get temporary root access if you need to do some function. So this is a major change. If you're out there in the field and you install or need or use root access quite a lot, then this new consent token process is going to, I'm going to say, watch out for it when you upgrade to 750. Be careful. It's not you locked out of it. You just got an extra step to do to unlock that root access. So just want to highlight that there. It's caught a few people unawares that they've upgraded automatically and didn't realize that. We mentioned in the Converge Analytics, remember, that's sitting on the manager, that if you, for example, look in the alert types where you can see the 48 plus alerts that you're getting, here's just showing some examples here of amplification attack, that there is now a new column called observation types. So it gives you the additional information of what observations you need to see to generate that alert. So in Conversion Analytics, you have observations, then alerts, multiple observations. Observations might not be bad or good. And what I mean by an observation is like, for example, somebody observing me drinking coffee at, I don't know, 10 a.m. in the morning. That's fine. It's an observation. It's okay. But me drinking coffee at like, say, 3 in the morning is not, it's the same observation, but because of its time, that's probably unusual behavior for me. So that's what I mean by an observation. Those observations feed into the alert in the Conversion Analytics, which is what we're going to forward into, say, in Response Manager through syslog, email, or into XDR. So we've added that additional field. So if you notice that, that slipped into this version if you're using that. Also, I mentioned on the initial slide, the SAA Cloud, the dashboard, that's gone. So if you tried to look for that or had that before, that no longer exists. Not a lot of people were using it, but I thought I'd highlight it just in case you go try to find it in the menu. It was normally under the main Security Insights dashboard. You would see an SAA Cloud option where you could configure it and tie it to your cloud portal. Like I said, SAA Cloud is gone. Officially, that's part of XDR now. So that's why that's been removed. Smart licensing. Now there's a new user interface in here. Again, this is only really relevant for people that probably need to do license reservations. Now, as you know, with smart licensing, we license Cisco and it's mainly on flows per second. So what you would do in your smart license, you have a certain number of flows per seconds in the license bucket, and the manager would then check with smart licensing to make sure that you're compliant or not compliant with the number of flows per seconds that you're consuming, for example. In certain situations, because that smart licensing needs obviously an internet connection, it needs a phone home, so to speak, to check the licensing. That's not applicable. So some people need what we call a reserved license, which is basically a fixed license. And to configure it in the past was kind of difficult. You had to go through the CLI and do it that way. Obviously, because we're restricting root access now, you cannot do that through the CLI. So if you work in an air gap network and you use license reservation, then this is the new process to do it. You have to log in as a sysadmin, go to system config, And you see here, you go to advanced and you click on the license reservation and away you go. The actual process, once you click on license reservation on the right screen, is the same if you've done it before. And it's documented in the installation guides if you need to do that. But I just wanted to highlight that for those that work in AirCap networks and may have done this in the past, that the process has also changed in this version. And that's because of the compliance and the additional security work that we've been doing. Something that I was not aware of, and I'm not sure how many people were, and that's saying something that we can actually run packet captures as a non-root user, use a system config. Um, Now, I've always been aware that we can run, for example, packet capture using the web interface on the flow collector to make sure that we see packets coming in and out and receiving net flow, for example. But I didn't realize that we could actually run a packet capture at system config level, and especially on the manager. This wasn't possible before in the web user interface. So this is really good for troubleshoot. That if somebody says, well, the manager is not seeing anything, you can actually now through the system config run a packet capture and actually look to see what the manager is seeing from the data store or from whatever appliances you think it's running. So that was something again under the hood that I didn't realize that we had. We've also changed with the data store the backups. So this is for offline storage. So the data store itself has obviously the database, and that's where we store stuff. You can have a single node or a cluster of 3 nodes and then N plus. Obviously, if you have a cluster, then the database is shared amongst those 3 data nodes. So if you lose one data node, you're fine, you got 2 backups. It's kind of like a RAID approach. But some customers have asked, well, I want to offline the storage off the data store nodes to SAN storage, for example. And here we've given that ability to make it easier to do that again from the system config menu itself. And you've got the options there to configure it. You obviously put the IP address, the storage path, and things like that, and the number of old backups you want to keep. Because obviously, if you go to offline storage, it's up to you then how many historical databases you want to keep or how far back you want to go. What I like about this kind of backup method is that when you do this offline backup method, nothing goes offline. What I mean by that, if you have the traditional deployment where you have the manager and a flow collector and no data store, for example, if you wanted to back up the database on the flow collector, it would have to technically go offline because it's the database. Database had to go down. You would have to do the backup, and then the database would come back online. Obviously, when it's when the database is off the flow collector, you may miss some events, and that's not good. We don't want that. So this method is a much better in the sense that it's taking a snapshot of the database, so it doesn't affect our operations, and you're not going to miss any events that are happening as you go along. So I kind of like that. And the reason why I like it is because in the older model, should we call it, without a data, so generally people wouldn't bother to back up the data because of the time it would take to back up. So if you have a very large database on the flow collector, it could take hours, potentially days, depending on how much information you have, and you don't want your system offline for that. So again, another reason why you should really move towards a data store. Okay, some more smaller additional enhancements that we've seen. I would say small, sorry, that's kind of rude to the engineering team, but they're not small or simple, but still kind of key. The TLS support, we now support TLS 1.3. We still support 1.2, but you can configure that, as you see on the right here, in system config again. If you're logging in as sysadmin, you can change the version there. You can have TLS 1.2, 1.3 supported, or just 1.3 if you want higher compliance or higher security there. If you select it, this is obviously to be used for the inter-appliance and external TLS connections. So, for example, I think if you upgrade to 750 at the moment, by default, it will select TLS 1.2, 1.3 for you, just to make sure there's no interruption in service on that. Because what we're saying is that if we use TLS 1.3 only, then, for example, the manager talking to the data store or the manager talking to flow collector or data store to flow collectors, for example, they will all use TLS 1.3 to communicate. So to make a smooth transition, we always make sure that we still leave you the option to talk at 1.2, just in case you haven't updated anything. Now, the important one here is the root access restriction. This one, I'll be honest on the call here, watch out for this one. I mentioned it. It basically disables the ability for you to SSH in as a root user, or even SSH in at all. On the right hand there, I've got a little screen slot. Some of you might recognize that if you ever go in on the appliance. So if you went on the manager or the flow collector or in data store from the web interface, and you went to edit the appliance configuration, you'll see this SSH option. The first thing I would always do would enable SSH and root access, so I could actually SSH in and run whatever I needed to do. That is no longer an option. And again, that's because of all the compliance and government restriction works that we've had to do on 750. So we have to be careful here. We've removed that access. It is there, still there, but you will have to talk to TAC, and they will be able to generate what we call this consent token. So it's like a challenge request. So when you go on the command line, you'll be challenged for a request. You get a string, and you give that string to TAC. TAC will generate a response. You enter a response, and you're in. You can get into the root access. So there is a way to do that. It's not super easy, but then it's not supposed to. So we haven't kind of removed it completely. It's just extra kind of step to go through to get there. So again, be careful on that. But this is why we've changed, or I should say, we moved a lot of workflows into that system config menu we see on the top right, because we realize, if you want to run, for example, a diagnostic pack, you want to do that license reservation I meant, or do any data store operations, you don't want to keep filing up TAC to get root access tokens to get in to do those functions. In the past, you would have had to. Those functions could only be done as root user. So we've added those new system config workflows to alleviate that kind of stress. We've also updated the Mongo database. Like I said, as users, you're probably not going to notice that yourself, but we've had to get up to a more modern version again, security-wise and compliance-wise. And actually, we're using, more of an off-the-shelf package rather than a custom one we used to use in the past, which is obviously better for us, for software maintenance and things like that, and efficacy. Now, I mentioned IP version 6 support. Prior to 750, you could add a connect to the appliances via IPv6. We've always had that ability to have IP version 6 there, but we never use IPv6 to communicate with each other, if that makes sense, between the appliances. We would also ingest IP version 6 flows. So if you had IP version 6 on the network, we would consume those flows. But as you see the caveat there of brackets, only if it was sent from an IP version 4 exporter. So what I mean that is the exporter being your routers, your switch, whatever the device is sending in flow. If that send it to us via IP version 4, we can then consume the IP version flows and report on them. That was prior to 750. Now in 750 onwards, obviously a lot of this work, as a side note, a lot of this work is key again for our USG 6 kind of compliance. Well, 750, we now dual stack. And that is the default mode. You see on the right hand there in the system config, you can change it to be IP version 4 only or IP version 6 only. But by default, we're doing dual stack on the appliances now. When it says for upgrades, though, the key point here, it will be IP version only when you upgrade. So if you want to go dual stack, you'll have to go into system config and change that. So just be careful of that. Also, what I've listed here on the slide is what's not supported at the moment in IP version 6. So if you're using the old desktop client, or some of you might know it as the Java client, which we don't like to talk about, it's a Harry Potter kind of reference there. The data store, data nodes itself, the SAL app, all those listed there do not at the moment communicate over IP version 6 or don't support it. So be careful of those. So that's why it's probably best to use dual stack at the moment if you want IP version 6 in this particular version. Okay, we mentioned about easy generate self-signed certificates. Like I said, the key point here is that in a previous version in SNA 742, we introduced certificate expiry warning. So if you're an existing customer and you've had SNA for the last 3 to 4 years, well, probably 4 years, you'll probably notice your certificate's about to expire. Most of the SNA appliances, whether virtual or physical, will normally ship with a 5-year, what we call appliance certificate, so they can trust each other when they communicate. So what we've done is made the process now. In 742, we introduce a warning to warn you guys that it's going to expire. And then in 750, we made it easy to actually go and recreate or refresh all those appliance or identity certificates on appliances uh, before they expire. Obviously, you want to do it before they expire. It's a lot more painful to do it after they expired, as you can imagine. And the beauty here is that you can generate your own self-signed certificates across all the appliances from one primary manager. So from the manager, you go into system config, you go here, you see the recovery, you say certificate refresh. There's no need to deregister appliances from what we call the central manager and re-add them or anything like that. You just do it from the manager and you click on a specific refresh and it will go to your data store, your flow collector, your flow sensor, whatever the appliances are that need refreshing and replace all those for you. So there's no need to mess about with trust stores on appliances and things like that. So I kind of like that because I'll be honest, I don't like certificates. A number of times certificates and switching them around and yeah, it cause a lot of problems or break a lot of things. And getting towards the end now. So just a recap on what hardware is supported at the moment. So in SA7 750, we support the M4 UCS chassis. We support the M5s and M6. Do note that the M4 and the next upgrade to 751 will not be supported as a physical appliance. So 750 is slated for release don't hold me to this. We're probably talking in the summer, late June, July, maybe a little bit later than that. So once that releases comes out, which have a lot more improvements than what we've seen here, then if you're running it on M4 hardware appliances from us, then you will not be able to upgrade to 751. So just a warning there. So that's why I thought I'd supply this chart here, just so people know that. And we'll be sharing these slides out with you later. And there's a link here to software version support matrix, which is on our website anyway. So just a caveat on there or something to be wary of or aware of, I should say. We mentioned hypervisor support. In this version, we've extended support for ESX 8, 8.0. We've also, in the 742 documentation, which is our previous release, we also updated that to allow ESX 8 as well. We've also made changes in 750 for KVM support. So you'll see that the more recent versions we're supporting on the KVM side. Okay. And then on the certifications, I did mention the major drive of this release was to make it compliant or help us get compliant in a lot of these certifications. So the DODIN, FIPS, Common Criteria, and USG 6. So definitely for the US federal government, this is kind of key for us. Obviously, I know if you're not in the US federal government, it's not maybe top priority, but these are underway at the moment based on the 750 that we've talked about here. And the reason why we've got that restrictions and things like that and IPv6 support. So you can see why we've done a lot of kind of under the hood changes on this kind of release. We've also done some other things here. We moved network diagrams. If you ever use network diagrams, they're no longer an app. They're in the core product. So what I mean is, in the past, you have network diagrams, you have host classifier, you had other kind of apps that you would have to load separately once you installed the manager or were running the manager. Now in 750, the network diagrams is part of what we call the core. It's no longer a separate app that you need to download and put into the manager. Also, we started migration to something called Magnetic. Now, Magnetic is the GUI, the web user interface. And on the right there, there's just a mock-up of what you will expect to see. What it effectively does, instead of the menus going across that you're used to with an SNA, you see the menus going down on the left. So when you go on the left, you click on something, then you'll see a drawer or more information pop out to the right. What we're doing here is we're trying to get or present within Cisco itself, within all the security products, a unified kind of view or GUI. So people are used to navigating one, they can navigate the other. So this is very similar to, for example, if you had a Meraki device, you would see the same kind of magnetic layout on that. Okay. And just to wind up here, just want to highlight again that Secure Network Alliance is part of our XDR story, the Cisco XDR story. And We're using this obviously for correlation of data. We're using for impact analysis. We're obviously extending information into XDR itself. XDR itself can then also query us for enrichments. So if you're doing threat hunter or investigation with XDR, underneath there'll be APIs there running there to pull information from that. So I just want to show that obviously, we're a premium on-prem NDR, and then we're functioning with XDR. And going forward, we'll see better, shall we say, integrations of those alarms events going up. And just the final slide here, I'm conscious of time, is you might have heard of us, suites. I mentioned suites at the beginning. We are now part of what we call the Advantage Suite you see on the top there. So in Advantage Suites, you've got Cisco XDR Advantage, Cisco Endpoint Premier, and Cisco Network Analytics. So we don't come in at the essential levels, but we come on the Advantage level. So if you're looking at buying suites and you bought the Breach Protection Suite Advantage, you will get Cisco Analytics included with your XDR and Endpoint as well. Obviously, with SNA on the right hand side, SNA is not going away. It's all part of this story as well. You get advanced telemetry ingest, you get the threat hunting, we get that offline detection visibility, network segmentation, advanced traffic monitoring features. That all is on-prem with security analytics. So that kind of functionality is helping to monitor your on-premise environments, even some of your cloud environments, and taking that information, looking at behavioral alerts, looking at that, and then forwarding off into the XR itself. So we're all kind of key to that. Now, one last thing I want to show is, and we will give this link out. Make sure I get the right screen. We give this link out at the end of the presentation. Now, you should see on my screen here, and I'm looking to my right screen, that there's a site here. And like I said, don't worry about trying to screen grab this or copy it. We will provide it. Carlo will do that in the team. But what I wanted to highlight here is that if you want to have a look at some of these new 750 features, you can come to this, what we call click-through or self-guided demo site that is externally available. When you click on this link, you'll see a menu here on the right, and the menu gives you an option. You've got about 7 different, should we call it labs or demos you can walk through. For example, investigate walkthrough, detections with central analytics. Remember, that's converged analytics. Network detections with visibility module, response management, central analytics. All these I just discussed in the 750 deck. These are here. And if you want to see these features in a bit more depth, then go ahead and access this demo. So for example, if I want to look at firewall detections, I can just click on that. It's going to walk me through. It's going to give me some explanation of what I'm looking at. Obviously, I click next, and I'm free to roam. Now, it's not a demo system, so you won't be able to configure anything, but you'll have a good look and feel what you can see. And it will flash in certain places here where I want you to go next, and it gives you some more explanation of what you need to do. So you see here, this is a lot better than me actually showing you lots of slides and what this looks like, but you can actually go through this at your own pace, and you can always quit it at any time and show you the details on those use cases. Okay. Right, I'll leave it there just so I think we've got about 5 minutes, maybe. If there's any questions, team.
Thank you very much, Eric. So yes, if you do have a question, please feel free to go ahead and post it into the Q&A panel. We'll get that answered live. The link that Eric mentioned, thank you, Robert, for placing into the chat, is in the chat as well.
Thank you, Robert.
And while we wait, let me go ahead and place where today's recording will be made available on the Cisco Learning Network. So let me get that posted along with the discussion thread. And if you wanted to, you can actually view the live stream, the unedited version, immediately after the session ends on that live stream link. So let me get that set. If any of the panelists sees any questions, feel free to go ahead and unmute your microphone actually and mention that. And let me actually get that live stream link. So give me 1 sec. Okay, let's see here. I think you've covered a lot and a lot of information to take in, so don't see any questions at the moment, but here is a live stream link. Okay. Yeah, I don't see any other questions or any other new questions popping up. Eric? Oh,
Okay.
there goes one. Greg asks, what root functions have been moved to sysadmin?
Uh, I said a lot of the root functions, for example, on that one slide was the ability to generate those diagnostic packs for troubleshooting, the ability for the smart license reservation. Um, I'm trying to think. There's quite a few there. I can't remember all of them on the top of my head, but those are the ones that jump out at me at the moment. I think most of the ones you probably find is some of the data store type of commands. So if you're kind of looking at data store logs, things like that, those are kind of restricted with the root access. So those haven't been moved, the kind of engineering side of things. But everything you need to do for day-to-day running, should we say, has been moved across there. So I mean, knowing us, there's probably some stuff we've kind of missed, I'll be honest, but we keep improving this. So this is our first iteration with that. So if there's something you think we've missed in that route thing, then do get in touch with us. But like I said, most things that jump out of mind at the moment is to me is like, if you wanted to generate diagnostic pack, the license reservation type stuff, data store operations and more, we kind of move them into that system config, so you can do that as a system admin user. There's obviously a lot more functions as well, but I haven't got the long list in front of me, to be honest.
All good. Thank you very much, Eric. And then next follow-up question, I can go ahead and answer that one, Greg. Yes, the slide deck will be made available. I'll, after the session, I'll bookmark that post-webinar discussion thread. That was where I will post the copy as a PDF, a downloadable PDF. All right, Eric, I think we've covered all the questions for today. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
No, I'm just saying thank you for listening. I know that was a lot very quickly, in an hour. But yeah, any questions, just come back to me or the team, and we can help you with this if you need to.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Eric, and thank you to our panelists and the whole team for bringing your knowledge to the Cisco community. Again, if you have a question, I'll keep the Q&A window open for a couple more minutes, or feel free to jump on the post-event discussion thread where you can follow up with any other questions you'd like. For even more tutorials, demonstrations, and future webinars, please do visit the Cisco Learning Network. That link is in the chat. At this time, you'll be directed to a survey, so we do encourage you to take the time to participate. Please let us know how we did, any future topics you'd like to discuss, and any other further comments. Again, we thank everyone for joining in today, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.